My name is Shahmi. I'm a credit analyst at Goldman Sachs, and this has been Lepas Sekolah.
So Shahmi, where did you go to high school?
So I went to Asia Pacific Smart School. It's near Subang Airport.
And what exam board did you choose to do?
I chose SPM just because I've always done government syllabus. So I felt, just go for SPM. Simple.
So IGCSEs were not in the consideration at all.
Well, I wouldn't say that. Actually, there was a point in time where we were considering IG, but I felt, just go for the simpler choice, which was SPM.
And what subject combinations did you do?
I did full science stream, so that was at maths and the three sciences, and Tasawwur Islam was also my my additional subject.
Hit Tasawwur Islam.
Yeah, it's an easy A. What can I say?
What was it like studying Tasawwur Islam actually?
I rarely went for class, or if I was at class, I would be doing my maths division. So you can tell how easy of an A it is if that's sort of the level of effort I'm putting in.
Alright, where did you choose to do those subject combinations then?
So it was the most conventional. That's one, and I think second, it played to my strengths a bit more because for biochem and phys, there were some quantitative aspects to it, which I think is my strong suit compared to, say, something flowery like English lit or any of the other art stream subjects. So it was just something that I wanted to do, and I think it's the most conventional thing to do as well.
So you were not one of those kids who were forced to do the science stream.
No, I wouldn't say I was forced. Maybe at the start, like I didn't know if I wanted to do science or arts, but at the end of it, I think I would have gone for science. I don't imagine myself doing arts.
Alright, so have you always known what you were going to do when you were in high school?
Uh, More or less. I think more on the less than on the more, but I always had an inkling of being sort of in something business related, business or finance related. So that was that. I knew I didn't want to be like a physicist or a doctor or an engineer or anything like that.
Alright, so what inspired you to have this inkling to do business or finance related kind of work?
So I think my mom played a large part in that sort of influence. She was a chartered accountant back in the day. She sort of told me, if you wanted to do something a bit general, but something that can still lack your brain, add some value, finance is a good generalist path. So I went for that, and I also knew that I didn't want to do anything STEM heavy, because ultimately, I'm a fan of numbers, but nothing too deep.
So if you knew you wanted to do something business or finance, why not do business and finance in SPM?
Good question. The reason being, I always knew eventually after SPM I'd be able to have those chances to do something business related. I didn't want to rush the process, so I just went for something, more sciencey in SPM. It felt like the more conventional thing to do. And I think it paid off. Science in SPM gives you some basic quantitative skills, which help, a fair amount in uni and the workplace.
Alright, so you don't regret doing science at all.
Nah, no, not at all. I think it was the right path for me.
And how did you end up doing in SPM?
Not bad. I think I got 8A plus out of 10 subjects.
Yeah, not bad at all. That's
Yeah.
not bad.
Pretty decent.
Yeah, pretty decent. And where did you go to pre-uni after that?
I went to Sunway College. I ultimately what I did was A levels, but before that I did Shahmi Foundation program when I was still in my discovery phase. I did 6 months in there and I realized I didn't like it. Too much group work and coursework. I wanted something that was a bit more exam oriented, so I went for some A levels.
What's this summer foundation program about?
So it's a very generalist path. I just did not like it because there were some useful bits. It taught me accounting, it taught me basic business, but there were also some pretty other not so useful bits. Like they'll teach you about culture. There's an English class. I felt I was kind of wasting my time being in there, and the prospects weren't great. You'd end up in only Sunway University, which in terms of exit opportunities, if you want to call them that, were quite limited.
And what did you end up doing for A-levels?
So I did maths and econs, and then on top of that, I did physics, and then I did history.
And why did you choose these subject combinations?
So maths and econs, I think, are again very conventional options you'd go for if you want to study in the UK in some business related degree. Physics was because I liked physics, and history because I liked history. So it was a mix of pragmatism and passion in my choices.
All right. And just quick question before I move on. Did you get a scholarship to go to Sunway?
To go to Sunway, I did. It wasn't related to any public bodies or private companies. It was the Jeffrey Chia scholarship,
Uh,
which is automatic depending on how many A's you get in SPM.
Does it give you a fee waiver for your course?
It does. It does. If I had gotten 9A plus, it would have been full. I only got 8A plus, so I think it was like 20K.
Yeah, so get
So
your straight A pluses, kids.
yeah. So I'm a bit salty about that, but it is what it is.
But hey, how did you end up doing for A levels?
I did okay. I did pretty decently. I got 4A plus. You can't complain.
So straight A pluses this time.
Yeah. The second time around is always the best part.
So you went to LSE, right?
Yes, I did.
What did you do in LSE?
I did accounting and finance, which, if you know any other Malaysian in LSE, is like 90% of the population, besides actuarial.
Why accounting and finance then?
The more theoretical answer is the fact that like it prepares you for more business-related jobs. The pragmatic answer is the fact that it was the easiest thing for me to get into, preserving sort of the probability of me getting into a place like LSE.
Oh, so this is why you chose it over courses like business analytics, economics.
Yeah, I think sort of the main competitor in some of my choices was econs. I think I had like a pretty decent background for econs, maybe bar the fact that I didn't do further maths. But I checked the stats. Econs, it's harder to get into for LSE. Accounting and finance, less so. So it played sort of, there were some pragmatic elements at play as well.
So it sounds like getting into LSE was pretty important for you.
I think it was. Undoubtedly, it was sort of the best choice that I had, but it was actually not my first choice when I first started, thinking about these things. My first choice, strangely enough, was Warwick. But then, as I did my A levels and I realized sort of the opportunities I'd get in LSE, I realized maybe LSE was the better choice.
Yeah, because in war you get more paper exemptions, right?
Yeah, you do. You do. I think one thing to sort of preface is I didn't go into LSE on the basis of exemptions. I did accounting and finance, but I knew if I could, I didn't want to do accounting. So the exemptions didn't really play much of a part in my choice.
So almost pure pragmatism for ANF at LSE.
Yeah, well, pure pragmatism, maybe not pure, but it played a massive part, I would say. So I chose LSE because one, it's a very good school. Two, it's going to give me a lot of exit opportunities. And three, why not LSE? You want to be in the heart of London if you're going to do a degree in the UK, I think. That was sort of my preference. I didn't want to be in a university town.
So did it live up to your expectations?
I think it did. For the most part, I think it did. There were, some quirks to it, which I can get into soon, but I think being an LSE was probably one of the better choices that I've made in my life. I'll start with sort of the sappy answers. Friends, the friends you make along the way are part of your university experience with like like-minded people, etc. Second, I think if I hadn't gone to LSE, I don't think I'd be in the position that I am as like, working in a prestigious UK firm. So being in LSE, I'm pretty sure was a massive reason why I managed to get these opportunities in the first place.
Why is it that LSE was such a pivotal part of you being able to get these experiences then, do you think?
So the main reason, and I think it's not a secret, is because a lot of LSE people, at least those doing accounting, econs, peer finance, they're all try-hard finance bros, for lack of a better word. So the pressure is immense, the peer pressure is immense, because everyone wants, they want jobs. And, while it's competitive, you end up having a lot of osmosis as well, where, their passion seeps into you too. And so you learn from them, you teach them, and ultimately, it's the environment that makes you. So the environment in LSE was such that it was incredibly motivated, it was incredibly competitive, and that's the sort of thing that you need to, I think, get a job over here. So had I not gone to LSE where those people generally are, I'm not so sure if I'd have the same opportunities that I do now.
All right. So did it also solidify your sort of like job option after graduation?
I think so. I think so. It's a bit of a stereotype, but I think it's a stereotype because it's partly true. You want to go into finance, you're going to have a much better luck at doing that if you are from LSE.
What other parts about LSE or uni experience did you think help you with getting your job right now? Did you do any extracurriculars?
So I did. So I was part of ICMS for about a year or two. Did some, leadership roles, some project management. I think there was also a consulting initiative that I was part of. That was a really good memory for me. And I also held like some other society positions as well. But by and large, I think the one thing that I did to help myself get a job was just being around people who were in the same boat as me and learning and also getting help from them in applying for the job process, because I think you have a group of like-minded people doing it, it becomes so much easier.
How much weight do you think it had to your success in getting a job here?
Societies wise, I think a fair amount of weight depends on what you ultimately do. If it's finance wise, then I think yes, they do play a pretty reasonable part in getting you to where you want. Because when you start your first year, unless you have been an absolute tryhard from the start, you wouldn't really know what to do if you wanted to go into, say something like investment banking or just general finance. You'd have an inkling of like what those entail, but generally speaking, it can be a bit daunting. So the societies give you a bit of a platform to learn, to understand what's out there and what you need to do to get to where you want to be.
So would you say it was a matter of exposure?
Yes, I think that's basically the crux of it, exposure.
How would you rate your experience in LSE?
I think solid 8.5 out of 10.
You would recommend LSE to anyone wanting to do business?
Yeah, I would say I would. If not for the the superficial stuff, then the people that you meet there for sure. And this is a very it's typical sappy answer, but the people that you meet there definitely will change the way that you do things and the things that you want to do.
And by the superficial stuff, you mean?
I mean, like you have, let's say you apply for like a bulge bracket bank, having an LSE on your CV, let's just say it gives you a bit of a leg up. So that's the superficial answer.
Oh, you mean the brand and the signal?
Yeah, yeah. Though there's obviously more to it than that, but yeah.
Hey, I mean, game is game.
Yeah, game is game, and like just part of the life over here. But I think I made a pretty good choice going to LSE.
All right. So, how did you do in LSE overall, grade wise?
I think I did okay. I wasn't striving for anything too lofty, but I managed to get a first class. Did pretty decently for most of my modules. Can't complain honestly.
All right, great. All right. So, Shahmi, you do credit at Goldman, right?
Yes, sir.
What exactly is credit, and what exactly is Goldman?
I'll start with what is Goldman, right? Like, for those who know, it's a bank, it's an investment bank. We say we're one of the best in the world, at least in the US, we are one of the best. We do investment banking services, we do advisory services, we do, the typical sales and trading you think of in Wolf of Wall Street or Big Short, that sort of stuff. What I do as a credit analyst is a bit more focused on the financing aspect of what Goldman does. So, broadly speaking, investment banks nowadays do two things. They do advisory, which is your typical IB stuff, and then they do financing, which is where we give money to people, generally in the form of loans. Not consumer loans, but corporate loans and structured loans. Sometimes very bespoke, exotic stuff. So, where I come in is, say, our investment banking division wants to help company A raise some financing to buy company B. Company A will most likely use some form of debt alongside the equity to get company B. We will help give them money either for short term or long term purposes. And my job is to make sure that one, if we do give them money, how likely is it that they will be able to pay me back? And two, do we really want to give money to these people profit wise? Does it make sense, like economically, to give them money? So that's broadly what I do as a credit analyst.
So, to summarize, like we're five in one line, you would say that you.
So I give you money, I make sure you can pay me back.
All right,
That's my job.
brilliant. And what exactly is an investment bank?
So an investment bank, generally what we do is we help people raise money for various different purposes. At least that's the more classic investment banking type. And generally what you would raise money for is to buy other companies. So think of, if Nestle wanted to buy another F&B business, then investment bankers could help them raise money via debt or equity or if a company wanted to go public, then that's also another form of financing. Goldman would basically help them do an IPO and give advisory and also financing services. So, generally speaking, if I were to dumb it down, investment banking is all about helping companies acquire other businesses or to just raise money for other purposes.
And you've alluded to earlier, sorry, and you said earlier that it's quite hard to get into the UK job market, and I would think especially so when it comes to things like finance, right?
Yes, I would say so.
And what would you say was the most helpful thing for you specifically in getting your job?
I think for me, and it's one thing that's sort of a bit, that's a bit unique for Malaysian students is that after the end of our first year, we have the option to go back to Malaysia and do an internship. Not a lot of people over here, the locals, can actually do that because if you want to do an internship over here, you need to be penultimate year, which technically you have the same restrictions in Malaysia as well, but for international students, or at least internationally educated students, the restrictions are a bit more lax. So I think the one thing, if I had to say, that helped me sort of in the initial steps was to get an internship in Malaysia after my first year. It was a big building block in allowing me to start the process and succeed in my interviews because ultimately you're applying for a summer analyst position. If you were to apply in like say the big four, they wouldn't expect these things of you. That's just their culture. In finance is another culture whereby most of the people that you're dealing with somehow already have work experience. So you need to be on the same playing field as them. And the only way to do that is to have work experience yourself too. And then also there's another angle of like if you did something that was finance related, then even better because what they'll expect of you, maybe not explicitly, they will expect you to know a lot about what you do in finance already. Because these internships, yes, they're there to teach you, but at the same time, they do expect some level of proficiency in the get go.
With that being said, right, does your first internship matter?
The first internship matters insofar as you did your first internship, I would say. That's just my opinion. Maybe some other people will have differing views, but I think having that on your CV makes a difference.
So, what was your first internship?
So I did an auditing internship at KPMG Malaysia. It was useful because I could use it in my interviews, saying like, I actually have some real life experience doing, finance related work. For instance, in KPMG, you do auditing, but that requires just naturally that requires a fair bit of finance. Um, so I used that in my interviews, and I just like mentioned, yeah. So this is I have real life experience and interaction with finance, with capital structures, financial statement analysis, that sort of stuff, which interviewers will greatly appreciate because it means that when they see you as an applicant and they bring you on, then the burden of them training you will probably be lesser based on what you're saying. And then the second point that I was mentioning, I did the auditing internship and I knew from that point on I didn't want to do auditing. So it sort of spurred me to find somewhere else to go. One thing led to another, and that's how I ended up in credit at GS.
Had you not had the internship, you wouldn't have gotten into GS, do you
I don't think so. No, I genuinely don't think so. It would have been an uphill battle. It already is an uphill battle because, and this is just something I discovered in hindsight. All of the applicants that apply for the role that I have now, they all have internships, maybe even multiple. I think it was an absolute pivotal piece of the progress that I had to sort of partake in into getting an internship over here in the UK because the playing field is just incredibly competitive, and you have to have there's some extracurriculars to back that up if you want to stand out.
So, you beat the odds.
I think so. I think there was a fair bit of luck there as well, I would say.
So, we'll address the elephant in the room. Goldman Sachs. As an average Malaysian, what I know about Goldman Sachs is Najib Razak. So, do you have anything to comment on people who approach you and make this kind of statement?
I think what they say is definitely fair. All the people that I've met, when I tell them this, they don't mean it out of any mean spiritedness, but they do call me, you know, a traitor. It's all jokes, like it's all just banter. But I definitely get, if there is some sort of ill sentiment towards it, then I think probably the firm deserves it. They have, and this is more the corporate side of me speaking, they have taken steps to sort of remediate most of the mistakes that they made. There was obviously a massive lapse in compliance and corporate governance that happened back 10, 12 years ago. But it's still it's still a very touchy topic till now, even internally. But if I had to say one thing, whenever we do our financial crime compliance training, the first page of that website that we are directed to will always have 1MDB on it. So it is something that the firm has tried to make amends for, and it's something that is still very fresh in the psyche because we don't want it to happen again. But if anyone has comments, then for sure, I definitely do get where they're coming from, and I definitely agree with them.
So, in corporate speak, you're saying that the firm has invested a lot more into ESG compliance?
Yeah, I think it's not just a matter of ESG. The thing that was done over there was just completely anathema to what a sound management of the business ought to be. Like if I were to take a very recent example, look at BCG and what they've done with Gaza. You don't want to be in their shoes, right? But that's sort of the exact shoes that GS was in back in 2013, 2014. So it was an investment in expanding the business where we could, but doing it in such a way that we wouldn't get into massive trouble later on, because and that's I think that's a key part of sort of the birth of credit risk is like a more authoritative function, because ultimately it's not just about making sure our client defaults or not, making sure that they don't, sorry, but also about just just basic due diligence about who we do our business with. So, and I think that's a key part of doing business in finance, because one wrong move and you're gonna get sued or you're gonna collapse.
Yeah, so I was just about to say that. I imagine you get flagged not only for being in Goldman, but for being in credit.
Yes.
Right, especially you're a Muslim, I'm assuming.
Yes. Yes.
And I know Muslims have strong feelings about credit.
Yes.
And again, how do you balance this sort of ethical or maybe even religious injunctions, for lack of a better word,
Yeah.
against our job? Yeah.
I think for me, that is something that I'm grappling with. My thinking of it is it's very different what we do over here in credit, because, and this is not sort of me trying to justify, capitalism or anything like that. Like I won't get too philosophical here, but we don't do business to consumers. We don't do businesses to mom and pops. We don't do businesses to individuals, except those with like a trillion net worth, that sort of stuff. So the people that we deal with are very different. I think the main gripe that most Muslims have with credit is the interest part of it, the riba part of it, because it's predatory. Which yes, it is, but I think it also depends on the context. We deal with businesses. We deal with sponsor-owned companies. So if KKR or Apollo owns a company and they want to raise finance, we give it to them. It's a bit different over there. And at the same time, we're not really the ones lending them the money. We do lend them money, but that's not really sort of our bread and butter. Our bread and butter is helping them raise the money. Either we give them to it like immediately, and we sell it off to other people. Ultimately, the way that we make money is to help them raise money rather than giving them money per se. But I think sort of if I were to make a point, it's definitely fair to have those gripes. It's not a very black and white, completely justifiable thing. But ultimately, I feel if I were to make comparisons, we aren't a credit card company where we're lending to people who may, with predatory practices in such a way where we give them a lot of credit, and then if they can't pay it, then we're going to sue them or we're going to charge them incredible interest. That's not what we do over here. It's purely B2B what we do. So the universe is very different there.
Yeah. And you mentioned something interesting about your job scope earlier just now that I think is not very intuitive when you think about credit, which is the knowing your client part of credit.
Mm-hmm.
So your credit is not only on the material statistical part of things,
Yeah.
but it's also about character, about external risks that could potentially impact their credit in the future as well then.
Yes. So if I were to elaborate on that, I think this is more prevalent, say, if you were to deal with maybe sovereign entities, which is something that which we are people that we deal with as well in our line of work. It's not just vanilla companies like your Tesco's, your Sainsbury's, your Amazons of the world. We do deal with governments. If I were to make like a very obvious example, if I were to lend money to the government of Colombia, for instance, which is something that we do, it's not just about looking at the default rates. For instance, Moody's and S&P, which for those who are unaware, these are credit rating agencies who do somewhat similar work that we do, but what they do, that is sort of the crux of their work. They sort of give out their ratings for the fee. Moody's and S&P will have their view on like the default probability of like a government entity. That is one aspect of the credit analysis. The other aspect of the credit analysis is obviously stuff that isn't exactly credit, like sort of the ethics of it, the just the going concern of it, because it's not just a matter of finances, it's a matter of like PR as well, and a matter of like just the basic governance of the company. Because I can say, and this extends beyond sovereign entities as well, right? Like if Tesco were to engage in very devious activities, but their profit margins are still really good, that may prove a massive threat to their going concern, and that does factor into our credit analysis too.
So post 1MDB, you would say it's not so much just the risk of them defaulting if you give them credit, but also the risk associated with being the lender to begin with.
Exactly, and that is something that we do bring up quite a bit. I can't divulge, specific business activities that we do, but we do have a particular line of business where, it is in certain jurisdictions where if we were to get involved in this deal, and we do want to get involved, then we will have to grapple with the fact that, there are certain corruption cases going around that transaction. And if we get implicated, it's just going to be 1MDB 2.0. And that's something that isn't generally intuitive if you think of someone who does credit risk, but it is something that we definitely put a lot of attention into, because it all comes down to whether there's a going concern for this company or this entity. And it goes beyond more than just how much revenue they're making.
Okay, I think that was a very good introduction to what you do.
Okay.
So, if you were speaking to the bright-eyed first-year business undergrad, or to the lower form kid, or even to someone in high school who's looking to do what you do, or even go to finance, what advice would you give to them?
I think my advice would be, and I'm going to start with the generic stuff. Know if you want to do finance, because in all honesty, I feel like it depends on what you want and depends on what you want to do. I'll start with what you want. Like if you want something where you can have a pretty good work-life balance while also earning a fair bit, finance may not actually be the place for you, because it depends. Like if I were to take someone from investment banking, for instance, you may think they're earning bank, which they are. Put it in an hourly basis, no, you're not. You'd actually be earning more if like you were in a marketing role or like a consulting role or whatever. The people who join finance, one, they're not entirely motivated by money. They are for sure, but there's more to it than that. They're motivated by just being in finance, being in transactions and deals that make the headlines of FT, of Wall Street Journal, of Reuters, that sort of stuff. So you go into it if you want to be part of like an ecosystem of finance, of transactions, of being an intermediary in the larger economy. If you like that, then I would say do finance, because if you don't, then it's just going to be a lot of stress for something that you don't necessarily like, which is something that you can extend beyond just doing finance, right? If you are the sort of person who wants to be in finance, then I think the best thing to do to start making moves is to speak to people who do finance, read finance books, even watching like some of the movies, as cliche as it is, The Big Short. There are like some other movies as well about like the 20
Wolf of Wall Street.
Wolf of Wall Street I was going to suggest, but then I realized that's not really finance. That is just like Leo DiCaprio doing drugs. There are like so many different mediums of like information that you can take in to learn a bit more about finance. And ultimately, if you can, I think the biggest advice is to do something related to finance in terms of work experience. So internships come into play. If you can do that and you really like finance, then you'll go far into it. But it takes a certain type of person to be in finance, I feel.
All right, so that they have a good idea of what exactly you're talking about.
Yeah.
Illustrate to me what a day in a life as someone who works in a big bank like Goldman is.
I'll do it from my perspective, because a banker can give you, like an actual banker can give you a bit of a different answer. I wake up at like 7:30 a.m. I get to work at 9 a.m. First thing I do is to look at the FT and then see how markets are moving. It sounds very cliche, It's not like I look like, at like the FX markets, the bond markets, or like, oh, the gilts are trading, 2 bits lower today. Nothing as intense as that, depending on sort of the season. But it's always good to stay afloat. The one thing that I definitely look out for are like IPOs and mergers, because that's sort of my bread and butter. That is the first thing that I do before I come into the office. When I do get into the office, the first thing I'll do is find out what deals I have to work on for that particular day. And these deals, just to be very specific, are sort of financing deals, which basically we get looped into them to understand whether we can do them or not. And we work with the bankers to sort of move through the processes of getting approval for these deals from committee ahead of actually giving our client the money, or like ahead of them actually acquiring the company that they want to. But throughout the day, it will be very intense. It's very unlike consulting work where you're very specific in what you do in that particular time period. Like if you're a consultant, then all you really have to do is that project. Whereas if you're a banker and a credit risk analyst, you will have multiple different deals going on at the same time, which you will have, fighting for your attention constantly. And people will fight for your attention constantly as well, because, people will be calling you, they'll be telling you like, this is urgent, you need to give us a view, or, you need to do this analysis, like, end of day today. So things can get very hectic in the middle. Towards the end of the day, things tend to get a bit more relaxed. I would call it a pretty typical day these days if I leave at 8 p.m. But this is the function of the market. Going back to sort of my previous, answer about like whether you like finance, if you like to be very intertwined with what's happening in the market, or if like that's the sort of stuff that gets you going, then do finance. I personally found it quite fun to be in the situation after Liberation Day, where Trump raised tariffs for everyone, because our portfolio was going crazy. We had a lot of loan positions which were going in the red because of some tariffs, potentially affecting their going concern, that sort of stuff. It was stressful, but it was interesting because what was happening in the news, and we have like TVs above our desks which play like CNBC and Bloomberg constantly 24/7. I'm seeing Trump giving a talk about Liberation Day tariffs, and I'm looking at my screen. I'm like, I've got a portfolio of names which may be impacted. So that was a very fun period of sort of my career so far. And I think those are the sort of periods where we as credit risk analysts shine, because then we get to a point on like, we need to reduce our risk over here. We need to find a way to sell off our position there. That is sort of where we add the most value. But that is sort of the day in the life of a credit risk analyst. If I were to sum it up, it's being abreast of news and going through the motions and getting deals done for our clients and for our stakeholders within the firm.
So it's a 9 to 8 on an average day?
Yeah.
On a hectic day, it's a 9 to...
Well, it can be like a 9 to 8. I go home, eat dinner, and then I work until 10:30 p.m. or 11 p.m. depending. It depends on the season. Summer is supposed to be quiet. I've been lied to. It's definitely not quiet, but it ultimately depends on the season and the markets.
And you've spoken about knowing what you want out of a job in choosing what to do, right?
Yes.
So would you say then that for you it's about that ambition to hit the headlines then?
I think for me, it definitely makes a job a lot more fulfilling. Say for instance, I did like a deal with a company, and this is like a real life example where this company, I am working on 2 different deals for the same company. One is like a pretty vanilla corporate deal, and the other is like something a bit more exotic, a bit more structured. And it's all because this company is going to be one of the biggest IPOs in the UK this year. When it does IPO, and there have been so many FT articles about like when it'll IPO, how much it'll value for, it's going to be one of the biggest. And like being part of the ecosystem definitely makes the job a lot more fulfilling, knowing that you're actively interacting with the wider world of capital markets and finance. So that's one of the things that sort of keeps me going. It's always fun to know like you're not in a bubble. You are always in some way interacting with all the other players in the market, all the other stakeholders in sort of financial markets. And when you see a deal that you worked on pop on the front page of FT, that makes it pretty neat. Yeah.
So what advice would you give to yourself at 16?
In getting into
just an advice you would give to yourself at 16.
Oh, okay. I think it's to be willing to try new things, not being in your comfort zone. Those are sort of the things that I think would have possibly changed my trajectory. Not to say that I don't like what I am now, but I think I would have benefited from a bit more experimentation, I feel. rather than sort of trying to go for the more conventional things. Because I think if you've heard all of what I'm saying so far, a lot of it has to do with convention. Not to say that it's led me down the wrong path in life, not at all, but definitely when I was at such a young age, probably I was a bit too focused on like, okay, you know what, this is what all my peers are doing, or this is what my parents tell me to do. This is conventional, you know. There are other things out there, but this is the safest. It's not always about going for the safest option. Sometimes it's not about that. If I had known that a bit sooner, I feel like I would have been a bit more of like an experimental person, willing to go beyond my comfort zone. So I think that's sort of one key advice that I would have given, both in terms of like career and just like more holistic senses of life, social relationships, etc.
Hey, you've got your words of wisdom right there.
Maybe. Hopefully, someone finds it wise.
So now, question we like to ask everybody here: how would you summarize your journey Lepas Sekolah in 3 words?
Just do it.
All right, great. Thanks a lot.